Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. Today's opinions will be about Abhorsen by Garth Nix. So this is the final book in the Old Kingdom series, sort of. There's a collection of short stories as well, but I have not read them yet. But this is the official end. Because this is the culmination of a series, I'm going to go ahead and warn you that there are going to be spoilers in this video about the previous two books. Sabriel and Lirael, which I think is how I should have pronounced that name the first time. I don't know why. That's one of those names that when I saw it written, I had an idea in my head of how it was said, and then I tried to say it out loud and could not say it. But the important thing is, be warned, there will probably be spoilers for the previous two books in this review. So this book picks up pretty much exactly where the last one let off. Sam and Lirael, I did it again, Lirael, however you pronounce her name, have just realized that they are related and that she is actually meant to be the next Abhorsen, not Sam. They are besieged in the Abhorsen house after surviving a battle against the dead. They know that Sam's friend Nick has gotten involved in some kind of scheme to dig something up by the Red Lake miles away. Nick does not believe in magic because he's from Ansaltaria, across the wall, where magic does not exist. So he does not know what he is actually doing, nor what he is seeing. He doesn't know that the man he thinks is his guide is actually an evil necromancer. He doesn't know that the workers that he's hired to dig up this weird artifact are not just diseased, they're the walking dead. And so he doesn't know what danger he is in. Lirael and Sam know that they are the only people in a position to save him and to stop what he thinks is just a science experiment. Because if they don't, and Nick does succeed in digging up these silver hemispheres, he is not just going to destroy the Old Kingdom, but also his home and the entire world. So the first step is to get out of the Abhorsen house and across the Red Lake, hopefully before the spheres are fully excavated. Okay, so I have consistently loved this series. Garth Nix is honestly one of my favorite young adult fantasy authors, though I'm pretty sure these are not actually young adult anymore. Like, especially this one felt a lot more like an adult novel than young adult. But I love his world building, I love his easy writing style, his characters, and his magic systems. He tends to use a lot of really recognizable fantasy elements put together in novel and interesting ways. Like necromancers, magic words, fantasy worlds that are like medieval Europe. These are all incredibly common things in pretty much all fantasy. But there's something in the way he paints them that makes them different. Like, charter magic isn't just saying a magic word. There's a collection of words that you have to reach into in the charter and physically pluck them out and drop them into your hand or hold them in your mouth until you speak them. It's all just taking things a step further to make it a step more interesting. I also feel that Nix actually has really accomplished the art of writing a strong female character. Like, both Lirael and Sabriel are bold, powerful women, but they don't feel like that's all they are. Like, a lot of people talk trash about strong female characters because that tends to be all that they are. They tend to focus a lot on showing the characters as physically strong, not daunted by anything, and bold and running forward, and that's sort of all that there is to the entire character. One of the ones that always pops into my head is Anita Blake from the Anita Blake novels. She is actually a fun character, and like once you've read more of the books, her characters definitely does develop. But in many of them, her character could really be described with 3 words. Short, sassy, and strong. The quirks that the author added really felt like just quirks, like they were set dressing, not like they were part of the character's actual soul. And many of them were clearly such diametric opposites to what we think of as a strong trait that it sort of felt like it was put in there to lampoon the idea and therefore doesn't feel authentic. Like, one of the big quirks that we find out about her in one of the first books is that she sleeps with, like, you know, stuffed animals. And it's like, oh, she sleeps with stuffed animals, but she's a strong female character. And she's embarrassed by it because she's a strong female character. But it doesn't affect the plot or any of her personal arc. But the only real elements of her character beyond the strength stuff that really are embedded in her soul that affect the plot of the book and her personal arc are the fact that she hates monsters and that she has almost no experience with men. And objectively, that does work in the Anita Blake books. We didn't need a deeply developed character in those books because they're all about action and running forward and fighting and kicking things. But that's not going to work for every book, and a lot of times you'll see that kind of strong female character sort of shoehorned in to a book with otherwise a lot of really deep and interesting characters. But Garth Nix's strong female characters, they have a lot more going on. Like Sabriel is brave, strong-minded, straightforward, and honestly standoffish. Her character flaws and traits directly affect the plot and narrative of her book and the books to follow. And the narration never feels like it has to directly or indirectly tell us what her traits and her flaws are. She's a fully rounded character. And Lyrael is equally strong, but in a very different way. She is thoughtful, adaptable, deeply responsible, and independent. Also, she's a character that we watch develop into her strength, so it just feels a lot more natural as a development than a lot of strong female characters that start out the book strong and end the book strong. But this makes for a lot of really enjoyable, fully rounded characters. Honestly, I do find the male characters in the Old Kingdom series a little bit less interesting. Like, Touchstone is likable, but doesn't have a huge amount of character to him. And Sam is just a slightly less active character. And that sort of does make him interesting in its own way, because his character arc is sort of him developing to accept the fact that he is not a leader, and he shouldn't force himself to be something he is not. He literally finds peace in himself by relinquishing the lead to others, and specifically to Lyrael. And I mean, yeah, he still does active, powerful, cool stuff, but it's mostly at the direction of someone else. His power is the power of a support player. And it's actually sort of really cool to see that just because he is a male character. And that's not usually a role given to the male character, that's usually the role given to the female character. And yeah, it's rare to see a book that just outright says, yeah, it's okay and right for this male character to be passive. But part of the reason that it is so rare is just because it's slightly less interesting to read about a passive character. So Sam as a character is conceptually nice to see, but it does sort of handicap him to have him not be that active. Also, I do want to say something in general about the world of this book. I think I mentioned in my review of Lyrael that I don't actually remember much of the book Sabriel. But what I do remember was that she saw very few people in her trip through the Old Kingdom. It felt like the Old Kingdom was very sparsely habited, with only a few communities holding on by desperately clumping together. And Lyrael picks up 20 years later. Touchstone and Sabriel have started rebuilding the kingdom, and it's shown that now is the kind of time that people feel safe living their normal lives and traveling about. And Lyrael and Sam interact with a lot of people, especially in the previous book, Lyrael. But throughout their journey through the Old Kingdom, they meet people. And I feel like the government and social structure of the kingdom is not very well defined. Like, the magic system is so incredibly thoroughly thought out and described and painted, but the lives of the normal folk, not so much. It's sort of like we're looking at a Hieronymus Bosch painting when we're looking at the magic. And then when we turn to look at normal people's lives, it feels a bit like a Manet. It's all very sketchy and not many details there. And like, that's not inherently necessarily a terrible thing, considering most of the books don't spend a lot of time with them, but it does sort of become noticeable. And once again, it helps that this book, once again, they're away from most of those people. We are back in the southern part of the Old Kingdom where there just aren't that many people. But it's still sort of plagued on my mind that we didn't know much about what normal people's lives were like in this world. The other thing I really feel like I have to address here is the ending. I'm not going to give too many spoilers about this, like just vague things, but the events, to me, they work. The magic solutions, they work. The, like, way that the ending is, like, described, the actual climax, it works. But it sort of felt like the book needed another 100 pages. Like, Nix was trying to do this cool thing where there are several characters living important narratives that all come together in an unexpected way to create the party designed to save the world. And that's a tried and true fantasy narrative. Like, that's most epic fantasy books. But there just wasn't enough time spent with most of the narratives. Like, Touchstone and Sabriel are only in, like, 3 chapters throughout the book until the end. Nick's story is more developed, and he spends a good bit of time unconscious. And, like, in the last book, the Nick section actually really bothered me, because the Nick sections felt like they were wasted time. Yeah, there was some important information in them, but mostly they felt like the villain chapters that appear in a lot of books, where suddenly the book is from a villain's point of view, and you just get to find out, oh ho ho, bad things are going to happen. Up until the moment that Nick's story actually interacts directly with the main stories, that's when it sort of feels like it develops into something more, and Nick develops more as a character and becomes a lot more likable. Because also, yeah, in the last book, Nick was not likable, and I was sort of wondering the entire time why the hell Sam was risking so much to save him. But then there's also, like, Elamir and the 2 Claires, who just feel like they come out of nowhere. And I feel like they wouldn't have felt like they came out of nowhere if we hadn't spent time with Touchstone, Sabriel, and Nick. Like, if those characters had been completely just, like, us finding out what's happening to them through other ways, then it wouldn't have felt weird to have Elamir and the Claires have no sections of the book in their point of view. But just overall, those 3 characters by the end felt like they were just filling in the numbers that Nix needed to end the book. And in the end, it sort of felt like Nix was trying to have the epic fantasy with a giant cast of major characters, and not have it at the exact same time. And then they do come together, and it has to be a really fast-paced section. There isn't time for the characters to have a lot of emotions at each other, but it sort of feels like they need to. There is a lot of shit that needs to be addressed, and it sort of feels like cheating not to have them address it. This whole, like, nope, we've got 5 minutes to do astronomically large amounts of magic, so no time for emotions, it just feels a bit like cheating. Even the epilogue, I felt like it was cut off way too soon. Like, there are a lot of emotional de-escalations that need to happen, and that we need to see happening, that we don't because the book just ends. A character has just come back from the dead, for God's sakes, and it's implied that there's this future romance that we have no chance to see if it develops or not, because the book just ends. And, like, I assume that the short story book that is also part of this world probably does address some of this, but I'm not a huge fan of short stories, so I don't really want to go out and buy a short story book just to find out, like, how these characters interact in the 10 minutes after they save the world. And I feel like a lot of that stems from the fact that Lyral and Abhorsen feel like they were written as one book. Like, honestly, at very least, I feel like Garth Nix drafted them out as one book, and he realized how long it was going to be and started cutting things. And specifically, it feels like he cut a lot of side character arcs. And so he knew what the shape was going to be, and when he wrote it, it was still, like, you know, 900 and something pages, and probably someone looked at him and was like, sorry, Garth Nix, you're a great author, you're a great seller, but we're not going to try to sell a 900-page, possibly young adult, possibly crossover novel. Like, that is not going to sell. And so suddenly he had to cut it into 2 novels. And, like, especially considering the way that Lyral ends, and this one begins, this one picks up immediately after the last book. And it includes really hasty, quickly added in reminders of what happened in the last one. And, like, when I look back at the ending of the last one, Lyral, it feels a little bit like a mid-book action scene that got amped up into a climax. So, overall, the shape of the two books end up becoming a little bit warped, in my opinion. But that being said, I don't want to give you the wrong impression here. I did really enjoy this book. I loved the character development of Lyral and Sam, and I even really started to like Nick by the end. And I thought the ending was the perfect kind of predictable. Like, to me, a good ending, you need to see it coming a couple of chapters ahead of time so that it feels right. It's like when you're latching something and it catches and you feel that click. Like, if you don't think there's going to be a click and you hear a click, you're like, oh shit, I broke something. And if you think there's going to be a click and you don't hear it, you're like, this isn't latched, this isn't working. But if you're predicting the click and you latch it and it clicks, it feels like all is right in the world. And I feel like this is that kind of ending. It's like, yes, that is correct. That all makes sense in world. I approve of it. And also it's the kind of ending that... sort of hints that there are future adventures in this world, which is my favorite kind of ending as well. Like, I don't want the ending to feel like, yep, and that was the last adventure, that's done. So I'm very happy with that about the ending. Also, the magic was further explored and developed, which made it even more interesting world. And the way the magic works really works well with the ending. Like, it all connects in a way that feels very organic and natural. And also the fact that the book did leave out a lot of the side characters' arcs allowed us to intensely focus on the two main arcs, that of Sam and Lyral. And it just intrinsically makes the reader more intensely connected to your main character if that is the only real arc. So overall, I loved this book. I thought it did some really great things. I just didn't quite love it as much as I liked the rest of Nix's work.